called up my friends and we had a chat, talking about life and just chewing the fat. You'll find it here on Biggie and Nixz, small time big shots. Welcome to this episode 3 of Biggie Nixz podcast, small time big shots. Forgot the name of my own podcast for a second there. This episode, we have Luke Thomas, currently of Golden Sunbird, previously of Malachi, before that Lost Boys, and very, very early on as a young man in Blind Crusade.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting, man, going to the guys that have been on so far and revisiting how I met them and the scene as it was when they were playing in Townsville. And Brandon, the last guy I had on, was playing in the time when I was in high school bands around the same time as him, and then we were in a uni band around the same time together. But then by the time Lost Boys came around, I'd moved away from Brisbane and moved back. And I had no recollection of Blind Crusade until years later when I played a gig with the Lost Boys and you guys were talking about like my early band in uni days called Dogwater. And you were like, yeah, do you remember like a metal band? I was like, vaguely, and went and found the DVD and I was like, oh, what the heck? So one of the things I wanted to talk about was early days in high school, you and your brother, big metalhead guys, but you've come from a very like musical family. Was like the heavier music something that was introduced by your parents to you guys at a young age, or was that something you kind of found by yourselves at a bit of a later stage in life, like in your teenage years?
Definitely not from my parents. My brother was sort of leading the charge in getting into metal.
Yeah.
I'm not so I think it was more the technicality of metal that drew my brother in it, especially as a drummer.
Yeah.
And I think when you're like 15, 16, it's just like you want to play the most technical thing that you can.
Yep.
And it's just like, oh yeah, pop 4-chord song, that's fun, but what about a blast beat? And it's just like, yeah, or what about like 3 different changes throughout the song instead of just verse and chorus? Like, let's just go from 3 really highly technical riffs to the next one. And it's just like, oh yeah, that's challenging and fun.
Yep. Yeah, I think that was part of the attraction for me to metal as a young person as well. Like my father in particular was always into like heavier rock, like your Zeppelins and your Black Sabbath and stuff. And like when I was younger, never really took much interest in that because it was like, oh, that's dad's music, whatever, dad. And so I'd listen to what was on the radio. But then as I started playing drums and getting into playing music myself, the heavier music was something that attracted me because it was like, oh, there's something tricky to learn. Like all that radio stuff, yeah, it's interesting. It's all right for kids, but this metal stuff's where it's at.
Yeah.
So then going from metal into, say, the Lost Boys, because I've just spent the last hour listening to the Lost Boys EP or album, I'd actually call it. I think it was about 8 tracks there in the end. That's currently still on Bandcamp. How do you go from metal to the Lost Boys?
Well, I actually did solo music before the Lost Boys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so, and that was fully acoustic singer-songwriter tunes. And so it was sort of like metal were the bands that I was playing with in school. We were just making bands. We all loved like hardcore, thrash, and stuff like that. And then it was all older guys. I was the youngest guy in the band. So, and it was all mainly my brother's friends.
Yeah, right.
And so they were all like 3 or 4 years older than me, and they all eventually left school, and I was the only guy who was still in the band. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just start playing acoustic. So at first it was just the metal songs on acoustic guitars, jamming that. And then I was like, oh, like, started finding out about like Angus and Julia Stone and like great folk artists. And I was just like, oh, like City in Color, like Dallas Green. And I was just like, wow, like acoustic music is awesome as well. So I did this big switch from metal to acoustic tunes.
Yeah, right.
And then I finished school and I moved to Townsville and I was like, I want to be a musician. And so I just started writing these acoustic tunes and trying to get them out. And then a band started forming again, which eventually became the Lost Boys.
Yeah, okay. So because you're a Burdekin, were you a Home Hill or Air side of the Burdekin?
I actually grew up in Air for a little while, and then we
Yeah.
moved out to Charters Towers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so yeah, a few different spots, man.
Yeah, okay. And then you ended up in Townsville. Was that when you'd finished high school? Were you studying anything at that stage, or you just moved?
Just moved for more opportunity to the big smoke.
Yeah, right. It is interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting, man, that like, I know guys from, Air and Home Hill and uh places like Mackay or even Ingham that all came to Townsville because it was the big city. And we were all like, this is not an exciting place, guys. You've come to the wrong place if you want to have fun in a music scene. But then I think it kind of evolved for a while there. And then by the time I left in 2009, there was like more of a developing music scene happening for younger people being able to transition from being in bands in high school into going into playing in clubs and like live music venues.
Mm.
So I think like, do you remember the early days of playing small venues in Townsville and like what were some of those bigger venues for you? What kind of like some of the big crowds you were pulling at that stage?
Well, I was really inspired when I first moved to Townsville by the the whole art space crew and the run crew and that whole scene that was happening in that building on Flinders Street. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Yep.
Yeah, and like I remember there was just like studios there. There were people spray painting, break dancing, and like that was all stuff I'd never seen before. Like
Yeah.
growing up in Charters Towers, a small little country town, not really much art or culture there at all. And moving there, and then there's just like this crazy cool scene happening there of like people doing really artistic stuff and expressing themselves. And I was just like, wow, I want to be like in amongst all of this. So it was pretty radical for me from the move from Charters to Townsville to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is interesting, man, because even like I did visit that place a couple of times myself, and even for myself growing up in a, you know, fairly straight kind of household, you know, into music and into arts kind of stuff, but the going into that place was like a real eye opener of like a real clash of cultures of there's guys playing punk music and then in the next room there's guys with hip hop radios with spray paint and
Yeah.
and then years later going back to that place with 3 Mile Road and going up to a studio in that same building. And I think like little cultural hubs like that in Townsville really did help like to like nurture a vibrant music scene and it continued to build to what it is now because last time I was back up in Townsville, there is much more of a vibrant music scene there now. Like, was that something you found? Like, obviously, you spent a fair bit more time in Townsville than I did in the most recent years. Have you found that the scene is still growing and is actually now comparable to like a Brisbane or even a local Tasmanian scene?
That's interesting, man. I sort of feel like it fluctuates depending on the movement that's happening there with bands.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I think it just takes 1 to 2 people for a scene to grow into something huge, and 1 to 2 people leave and the scene to just die again. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and so the same with like the Middle East before we started playing. It was just a huge thing for the music scene in Townsville, and they were creating a culture. It inspired other people to play, and then heaps of bands were playing because there were other bands playing, and they needed support bands, and they're all different bands were linking up. And then once that band sort of dispersed, it sort of just died down again.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think bands like say Late November are inspiring a whole new generation of artists up in North Queensland at the moment, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I have noticed that. And on like episode 1 of this podcast, I had a chat with Alex from Late November, and he was saying like their scene up there is, growing and growing, and it's they're because their local scene is much more vibrant now, and there's a lot of young bands that are producing quality stuff, and there's more venues willing to have them, that more touring bands are willing to go to Townsville because they know, well, look, they've got a scene, they can produce a crowd. Um,
Mm.
so you're living in Tassie now. How have you found the local scene there compared to the kind of crowd you're pulling in Townsville?
Well, the whole transition to living down here in Tassie has been really hectic, and um, so the band, what Golden Sunbird is, the project was sort of just forming in the transition period of moving down here, and so most of the music from that first EP was written during COVID,
Yeah, yep.
the lockdown experience, and I just found out about Pink Floyd and started writing these sort of psychedelic concept tracks, and then we are like, hey, we might move, and then I was like, well, how's this going to fit? Because I wanted to release that under Marikai, these songs, and then I was like,
Yeah.
well, if we're moving, this could be a whole new project, and since I am writing most of it, I can just sort of tailor this whole new thing. So and it worked really well because it's such experimental, different music that, and we've found that Tasmania's music scene is, and just the population here are really receptive to experimental weird music. They like
Yeah,
that more
right.
than uh just the regular pop music, I imagine.
Yeah, right. That's kind of
And I,
cool.
yeah, because like say like festivals like Dark Mofo, I don't know if you've heard of that before.
No, no.
It's this one run down in Hobart, and they only get the most obscure acts, and they give them these huge festival stages, man. And it's like, um, Deaf Heaven. Have you heard of those guys before?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, they headlined the festival, which is like
Oh,
this
wow.
like crazy melodic black metal, and they're like
Yeah,
playing to like 2,000, 3,000 people in these big rooms. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah,
yeah.
I like festivals like that, and that's kind of the whole one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast is to like shine light onto like guys that like deserve to pull big crowds because what they do is really cool, but it's probably not gonna ever like it's not gonna be huge arena filling, stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so that, that it was Mirakai you were in Townsville when I saw you at Palm Creek last.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
how did that come about? Because um, Lost Boys finished up in about 2016. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, around there. I'm not really good at years.
yeah, yeah.
I don't really keep track of time that well.
Being a space wizard, it's perfectly understandable. Um, so how long roughly, or like, what was the transition between Lost Boys into Mirakai? Did you do some more solo stuff between those two projects?
I actually had a long series of personal growth.
Yeah,
Like
right.
from the closing of Lost Boys, I realized I wasn't in like the greatest place mentally,
Yeah,
and so I had a bit of a break from music. I actually thought that that was the end for myself, and so decided called it quits, and yeah, shaved my head, and I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna have some time away and sort of yeah, I had a lot of personal growth of sort of rediscovering myself and what really means a lot to me, and then uh, it was probably 2 years later that I was like, just started. First, it started with playing covers,
yeah,
and then I was like, oh no, I actually really do love music, and then that sort of fire in me started burning again, and I started getting back into writing, and yeah, we got a band together again, which was Merikai, and we were doing more like post rock, um, ambient instrumental jams, which was super fun.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I'd seen your last gig as Lost Boys uh, just before I'd moved to Brisbane, and then moved to Brisbane. Hadn't heard much from yourself or anyone really from the Lost Boys. Wasn't really sure what what had become of the rest of the guys in the band. And then I just happened to be lucky enough in 2019, just as we were coming out of 2019 or 2020, um, coming out of the lockdown stuff, and uh, Palm Creek was on again for the folk festival, and Townsville was on again for the first time, and you guys are playing the main stage. And I saw you, and I knew I'd heard some of the stuff that you'd like put out, but watching you was a different experience. I was like, oh wow, this is a lot different from Lost Boys, and it's a evolution of a sound, I think, but like there's growth in it as well, which is
Mm.
like that's always really nice for me. When like an artist decides, oh, I'm going to have a new project, I'm going to do something different, and you can tell that there's been growth in like their playing ability, but also the sounds that they're incorporating into the music, and the way that they're going about creating the music, which is one of the cool things I noticed with your new Golden Sunbird project is you've started to incorporate a theremin.
Yeah, that's been super cool, man.
Dude, take me through the process of learning how to play a theremin, because I've always seen guys play them. I'm like, man, I would love to have one, but I would just drive my wife up the wall.
Oh man, well that was really interesting. Uh, yeah, I've been really experimenting with uh just other sounds and finding things that inspire me, and then letting that guide the musical process.
Yeah,
And so yeah, like I've been like playing around with synthesizers, and it's just like you find these crazy sounds, and then you're like, wow, I could make a song out around this, like
yeah,
because I found I'd played guitar so much that it wasn't giving me the same inspiration that it once gave me when I'd pick it up, and it would just be like, oh, could just sit there and play that for hours. It's the same progression, but it wasn't giving me that inspiration. But as soon as I sat down with a synthesizer and just played like 2 or 3 notes, these huge soundscapes were coming out, and I was just like filled with inspiration again. And that that's been a big journey, was just like, oh yeah, how can I incorporate these into the new songs, and how do I add them in, what type of layers. And I found actually just on an app, it's called the Moog Model D app, which is it's made after the 70s synthesizer, the Moog Model D, which was used by like Yes and heaps of people, like
Yeah,
Stevie
yeah.
Wonder had one. And yeah, there's a theremin's patch on it
Oh,
where
right.
it sounds like a theremin, and I was just jamming on this thing like, wow, that's just like sounds so cool. And then I was like, went into the rabbit hole of theremins from there. It was just like, oh yeah, I googled a theremin, and then I was like, oh, it's an instrument. Went through the whole history of it, where it's like, oh, it was used in 70s and 60s sci-fi horror movies. It was originally an alarm system invented by a Russian who, and it was just like he figured out it could be an instrument, and then it became this like cult following strange sci-fi thing. And then I was like, I've got to get one of these and
Oh,
put it in.
dude, that's so. Hang on, what's the story about the Russian? So it was invented by a Russian who
I'm
was
pretty
trying.
sure his name is Leon Theremin.
Yeah,
and
right.
and so I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but this is what I've read, is that it was originally an alarm system where you'd walk into the radar of this antenna, and it would set off a tone, which is like any alarm system really.
Yeah, yeah,
But this guy was looking at the same design, and he said this could be a musical instrument. And so he took it and created the first theremin. And apparently people didn't like him at the start. It was just like, this isn't a musical instrument, and this is before even keyboards and stuff, like before any other synthesizer.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and but it's come a long way since then. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I mean, one of the most iconic theremin songs of all time has got to be the Beach Boys' "Good Vibrations," right? Like,
Yeah.
it, it is an iconic instrument. Like, I'd love to have one, mate. And it was one of the cool things. Like, what does that sound? Oh, that's a theremin. That's cool. And then I saw some live footage of you guys playing one live, and I was like, oh, that's made me jealous now.
Well, there's a famous quote by a sci-fi author that um any technology that is outside of our understanding will appear as magic. And so like, and this guy's talking about, like, say if aliens came down and they just showed us any of their technology that was more advanced than ours, it
Yeah,
would just appear as some type of magic
yeah,
wizardry. And that's what I imagine is what happens when we put the theremin on stage.
yeah.
And it's just like there's all these sounds coming out from, and no one's touching the instrument.
No
It's like,
one's doing anything. Like,
and like I just imagine people just like, whoa,
yeah.
that is cool.
How?
Like, especially since like theremins, I feel, have dropped off the face of modern culture. Really, like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
had their peak in the 60s and 70s, and it was just like, oh yeah, we don't need that thing anymore.
yeah, yeah. We've got these synthesizers now. It's like, yeah, they're cool, but no one knows how this works. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'm not gonna try explain how it works because I'll probably just make a fool of myself.
yeah, yeah. That's it. Like, I'm just gonna play with it, and it's gonna be a hoot.
Yeah.
But what one of the things that like got me listening back to your guys' stuff recently was the amount of different influences that I can pick up in like even one song. There's one of the songs very much like the kind of start of it reminds me of a Yes song,
Yeah,
um,
cool.
which was interesting when you were talking about, the Moog synth that you've been mucking around with was used by Yes, but then it kicks into a like a second part, and I was like, this is Pink Floyd, like all the
Yeah,
way right
cool.
here. Um,
Yeah.
so like those older influences, are they influences that you picked up like when you were younger that you've like revisited recently, or were they bands that you've only just more recently gone like, hey, what is this stuff from back in the 60s, 70s, 80s?
Well, uh, I would say my dad was into this stuff, like 70s rock, and a whole lot of my family were into it, but
Yeah,
I never went like headfirst and deep into the sounds because I was just too into what I loved when I was younger, like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and like sort of that modern rock era
yeah, yeah,
of and like Rage Against the Machine, Audio Slave. Like I just loved that modern production and like I couldn't really look past that and get into the older stuff.
yeah,
And
right.
I would listen to a few of the songs and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. But I never really like deeply listened until I had like a yeah, I just I don't know, maybe I matured a little bit more in my appreciation of music. And then I really sat down and listened to like 70s albums, and I'm really into looking into history and like what were these people thinking when they were writing this album, um what was happening in the culture at that time when these albums were being written, what technologies did they have access to write these albums, like those type of questions. And my mind was just completely blown of the skill of these musicians. And like especially Pink Floyd, man, I could talk about those guys for a
Yeah,
long
yeah.
time.
I mean, and like you said, the what technology do they have at their disposal? Like, and you see what they were working with, and you're like, wow, like, and you produced that sound. I think one of my favorite examples has got to be Bob O'Reilly by The Who.
Mm,
The synth start as a classic photo of Pete Townsend standing in front of essentially the soundboard that was the synthesizer he created to make the intro part for
yeah, I know
uh
the track. Yeah,
yeah. And dude, this thing is massive, like it'd take up like a full wall of my shed, and just
yeah,
cables running everywhere, and I'm looking at it
yeah,
going like, man, it would take me all of about 5 minutes to get jack of trying to figure out where to put all those different cables to make anything resembling what you've produced right there. And you did it to the point where you were like, I can replicate this frequently enough and easily enough that I can now record it. uh
yeah,
just you know like even studio technicians back then, like,
yeah,
you know the things those guys could do back then with the technology they had. Uh,
yeah.
so is that you've been all the stuff that you've been putting out, you've been recording at home by yourself, or have you been utilizing a studio somewhere?
It's all done on my iPhone, man.
Really? Just all on
Yeah,
the wow.
um, through GarageBand and on my iPhone. That whole first EP was just done. I've got a small little Scarlett 2i4 interface,
Yeah, yeah.
and then Shure SM57, and I've just got a little kit cable that plugs into my iPhone, and I did the whole EP just with that. And
Wow.
at first, it was just demo recordings, and then I was like, this actually, I don't know. I felt like I was tapping into that sort of 70s sound
Yeah,
with how absolutely lo-fi my approach was.
yeah,
And I thought, I don't need to. I don't need to go to a studio and do all this extra stuff if it's if if the essential is what I'm looking for is already there.
yeah.
And also I didn't have the money to do the studio either. So
100%, man. I think that's one of the interesting thing I've realized about the music that I've been releasing over like the last year and a bit is that the aesthetic of what I'm looking for is like a punk rock pub, real lo-fi kind of sound. So you can do that with very basic equipment and, recording straight through a DI into your computer and add a few effects. I,
exactly.
you know, I I use a dodgy old electric drum kit to record the drums in, and then I've got to edit them very heavily
Yeah.
because they just or the drum kit's dodgy, and so it'll trigger drums when I'm not playing them, and trigger a drum like three times when I've hit it once, sort of thing. So there's
Yeah.
quite a lot of heavy editing done. But I think it's interesting that we've now got the technology that you can release a lot of music from a shed or your
Yeah.
bedroom with a really basic device
Yeah.
that's of a quality enough that it is at least on par with any recording that came out during the 70s.
Oh,
And,
100%, man.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just like, do you think having that technology has allowed you to feel more freedom in the sense of what you release and how frequently you can release stuff?
Like so much freedom, man. Like it completely changed the way I thought about approaching, creating, writing music, being able to do it myself. And there's no restraints. It's especially since I'm doing all of it, it's like I'm not waiting on a producer, I'm not waiting on other band members. And it's not about uh, what time is available. It's just like if you want to do music, do music. It's just like it's up to me at the end of the day if I get it done. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there were when I was like right in the crux of writing that EP, I was like in my lunch breaks mixing the song, like
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
and then I was like, uh, just on the couch at home, just like still like mixing a song, thinking of new parts, and it's just like all the time I could just be working on music, and that was the cool thing about it just being on my phone. It was just like it's just in my pocket,
Yeah.
and
Just pull it out.
I could just like listen to the mix whenever, wherever, and it's not like this huge process of setting up all this gear to work on something. You know what I mean? And yeah, so I found a lot of freedom.
That's cool, man. Did you also find that being able to have everything recorded and like as individual tracks as well, did that make then going into the whole playing live process a lot easier? Because you could just say to each player, this is your part. You can listen to the individual track. You don't have to try to pull it out of a mix somewhere. And here's a copy of the mix to play as well, to listen to as well. So you could just say, I'm going to be around on this date to jam, and everybody knew their parts. Did you find that was the case, or?
Yeah, it's been interesting with this the way we've been going about the band for playing shows is we just find sort of session players to fill in
Yeah, yeah,
depending on where we are. And so our shows up in Townsville, we just found a bunch of guys and we sent out the parts, they learnt them, and then we created a band there. And then down here in Tassie, we've found a group of musos who are keen and like awesome, great guys. And we get together and we've all learnt the parts. And each formation of the band is, it's like it's a completely different thing. You know what I mean? Like everyone interprets the parts in their own way. And and then they bring them to the table, and then we work with them to recreate the songs.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's been like, yeah, it's super fun, man. Like, it's just like you don't know what to expect.
Yeah, yeah. So it's much more of a like a jam band feel, rather than like a strict, like even though you've got a recording that is out there in the world, what you're presenting in a live scenario is more of that's the backbone of what the jam band's playing. Yeah.
Oh, 100%, man. Yeah, because I still love just if there's a great riff, I'll just jam that for an extra couple of minutes and
Yeah.
like, hey, let's see what else we can add to this to make it even better. And so, like, there are songs that it's like, oh yeah, we need to stick it more structured. But I feel like when I see a good show, it's when the musicians are having fun and like interacting with each other on stage, and
Yeah.
that's the sort of the environment I try to create with the band.
Are you finding that that's fairly simple to do, um, even though you're playing with different bands? Like, is that part of the fun? Is the fact that you're learning how to play with different musicians each time you do it live?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think um it's like a good musician can listen to a song and understand the vibe,
Yep.
and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's the vibe. I can play that vibe." And then that's what it's more about for me is like, can you get the vibe?
Yeah.
And it's just like it doesn't matter so much the individual fills or say this note or that note or this little lead run or anything like that. It's just like capturing that vibe of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is the feeling we're trying to give to the audience.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty important thing. I mean, not with just jam bands, but with bands in general. That you can lose a lot of your crowd if you focus too much on being technically brilliant, and not as much on having a good time and letting the crowd know that you're having a good time.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
And I think that's a big part of being in a band and writing music with a band, as much as it is being a solo performer, is that the songs can have odd different parts to it, as long as you can keep a solid feel that people
Mm,
follow along to.
yeah.
So, how has your songwriting method changed over the years, from project to project, in terms of writing music first and lyrics later, or um, picking different sounds first? Like,
Mm.
what's your process now like compared to what it would have been, say, back for Lost Boys or even Marikai?
Yeah. Mm. I think it has slowly developed a lot because it's becoming more experimental and weirder, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just like I'm sort of trying to think of more alternate ways to approach writing instead of just like a verse, chorus, bridge, back to the chorus, finish.
yeah,
Like I know that that's been proven to work well, and like pretty much every single radio song has that exact progression. But it's fun to just do something completely out of the box and be like, hey, there's no restrictions on what a good song is. Like, and like anything can be a song. Like on that Golden Sunbird EP, there's like 2 minutes of ocean waves sounds
yeah,
at the end of Voyage, and I was like, we could cut that out and shorten it down, but like that's so calming and relaxing. Like when I was mixing that EP, I was just listening to that, and the way that the waves sort of pan between the two different ears,
Yeah.
I was just like, oh wow, like it doesn't have to be melodies or anything. Anything is music in the end, and it's just like, what are you trying to get the listener to feel, and
Yeah.
how do you want them to feel as well?
Yes. So this project, is it more of a concept project? You know, like the the get up that you wear live and stuff like that. Where does that come? Where does that come from? Um is that something that was specifically created for this project, or
uh, um,
because I dig
well,
it, man? It's wild. It's one of the wildest things I've seen
I,
in a good
at the
while.
Down Folk Festival, one of my friends came up to me and he's like, "Did you ever watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Did you ever watch that when
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
younger?" And he's seen this like sort of arm piece,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he's like, "Dude,
Oh,
you
Shredder.
look like Shredder."
Uh,
And then
uh,
he's like, "And then you're just shredding up there on the guitar."
that's brilliant. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, because I saw the photos from the folk festival and I was like, now that is a get up and a half. Like I've seen some interesting things up on stage at Palm Creek and the at the folk, but I was like, man, that is a righteous get up for
Thanks,
sure.
man.
And everybody in the band wears a cool. So like yours is that something you've completely made yourself? You didn't just buy bits and pieces, or you've had to fabricate that
I
yourself?
bought it off a costume shop online,
Oh
but
right,
yeah, I sort of envisioned it first of like,
yeah,
this is what like a space warrior from the end of time defending the universe looks like.
yeah,
And then it's just like created this character that I would sort of become when I play on stage.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it is cool, man. I think that's a fun thing. Like, and that's part of the enjoyability of your current project, and really all your music is that it's just a good time, you know. But the thing that I'm really enjoying about Golden Sunbird is the fact that it's got that concept of, you know, the space travel and intergalactic stuff. That's just like, yeah, it's not heavy, you know, emotional. It's not, you know, making a political statement or anything like that. It's just,
Exactly, man.
you
Yeah.
know, like it's a fantasy thing that you can indulge in for a while.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and I think that's a, you know, it's important that there are projects out there like that, and that there are bands out there like that. You can just, you know, Yes is a big one like that for me,
Yeah.
you know, where it is just like, yeah, these guys are, you know, they're just talking about fantasy worlds and, you know, good times, you know. So it's nice to see that, you know, there's still that in the world. Um,
Yeah.
So, what have your live shows been like, crowd wise? So, you're getting good response, and like you aren't the typical what you typically kind of see at Palm Creek um, in years gone by. But I mean, maybe it does seem to be heading in more of a
Yeah.
that direction of stuff that's a bit more modern, bit more rock and psychedelic influence coming in, um,
Mm.
which I have noticed. So, have you found that you've had like a pretty decent reception with the new
Yeah.
project?
Yeah. Well, we've sort of only just started pushing the live gigs, and like sort of the idea of creating this sci-fi reality has sort of only just sort of come about as we've been doing the live shows and been thinking of how we can make it more engaging and um just more fantastical and sort of theatrical as well.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, it's been fun, man. Like we get great reviews that like I had one person say that for a non-musician watching a band play, like you and I, we'd watch a band play and we'd be like watching, oh yeah, he's using this fill or this melodic line, and it's just like we
Yeah.
can appreciate that.
Yeah.
But for a non-musician, they don't understand that stuff, and they're just more looking at, oh yeah, this is cool, or oh yeah, I don't like this. Like,
Yeah.
whereas there's so much crazy stuff happening on the stage, like sort of like I imagine what would happen if you watch Slipknot live. Like these
Yeah.
guys are in masks. There's people who aren't even playing music, just running around doing crazy stuff. It's just like there's so much for you to watch and be engaged with, and sort of just trying to think, how can we do that with our band as well, and just be very engaging and fun and create an experience for people.
Which I think is like a really in this day and age. Like I saw one of the venues you guys played at was like a planetarium or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've played there twice now. We're playing there again next weekend, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. Like that would be a fun place to go and see any kind of music, but music of the nature that you guys are playing, it really just suits like that kind of environment. And I think, you know, it's nice to have alternative places to go and see music like that. Is that something you've found, that it's nice to be able to go and play somewhere that isn't just a bar or a club or, you know, a skate park on a Friday afternoon? Like,
Well, all those places are really cool, man. But
yeah,
yeah, like, but it has been fun to do other things and think outside of the box. So we moved down to Tassie, and this project was just forming, and I just found out about like what space rock actually is, and this whole movement that happened in the 70s during when people were first going to the moon.
yeah, yeah,
And it was also around the same time of the counterculture movement of people finding psychedelics,
yeah,
and there was this huge thing that space rock formed then. And um so the culture, everyone was talking about space. Like you'd turn on the news, turn on the television, and it was just like, hey, we're trying to get to space. It was just the space race.
yeah,
and
yeah,
and that started to be reflected in the music culture of that time, who were also experimenting with consciousness. And um and that was how like space rock music was formed. and that sort of was like, wow, that's really cool. And I also found this theremin player. This is just another random tangent. This famous theremin player, when I was her name's Carolina Ike, and she's like a virtuoso theremin player who plays with like orchestras. And she was
that's
doing
cool.
these shows in planetariums, and I was just like, wow, that's awesome. And then when we moved to Burnie in Tassie, a planetarium just opened like half an hour away from us.
Oh wow,
So
that's a pretty massive coincidence.
yeah, and I just went and hit them up and said, "Hey, could we play a gig in this space?" And they said, "We're in the process of booking our first shows here." So it was just like all this synchronicity.
Yeah,
And
wow.
so we got lined up on the bill for the first set of shows in the planetarium, and it was like a massive hit, sold out, man. And we played 2 sessions, and it's really interesting experience because it's seated. You're in like nice seats, like almost cinema seats, man.
Yeah,
And
right.
you're just sort of chilling back, looking at the ceiling, and there's like 3D visuals of stars and planets and stuff. And then you're just listening to this really chill space rock, man. And it's like the absolute perfect venue for
Yeah,
us to play.
I can't think of a better venue for your music and a better situation to listen to it in, to be perfectly honest. Like, yeah, it would be fun to see it at like a place like Palm Creek and whatnot. But I think at some stage that would be an ideal situation. Like, if I ever make my way down to Tasmania, I think it'll be like, Luke, I think you might need to hire the planetarium for the evening.
We'll do a planetarium tour, and
Yeah.
we'll hit all the planetariums.
That'd actually be pretty amazing, to be honest. Like,
yeah.
So is that something? Because I mean, you've been in the music in different scenes in different cities since you were a teenager, as we discussed. Has touring been something you've done much of, or has it kind of been when you've played a lot of shows in the city you were based in, but didn't venture too far away from home?
The Lost Boys did a tour down the East Coast.
No, yeah.
Which was awesome, man. We played Sydney, Melbourne, and then we played the Woodford Folk Festival and also the Womanjeka Festival in Melbourne, which was really sweet. That was like probably the peak of our band, the Lost Boys, which was that tour, and that was really fun. I don't think I really had much of a grasp of the whole situation until after it. Like, I don't know, I feel like I was pursuing music and trying to make music work for myself, but it wasn't till, and I was just like rocking up and getting these cool shows and getting booked for these shows and loving it, man. But I didn't really have a full grasp of how it all worked. And it wasn't until I started putting shows on myself and started like working a PA system, lugging in gear and bumping it out, that I was like really had an appreciation for what a show is.
Yeah.
And I think that was just sort of maturing, which took a long time to get to.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the unfortunate things that a lot of young guys, even guys that are new to the scene, miss out on, is that like there's no kind of training school for learning how to be in a touring band. Like, it's really just something you have to do and figure out. Like, I have not been in a touring band. I've talked to plenty of people who are in touring bands, and for me, it seems like there's no real definitive roadmap on how to do it. It's basically book the shows and figure it out on the road.
Or you have a manager who is super, super organized and pretty much doing all the groundwork for you, or you have to just jump in the deep end and learn it yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's like a thing for young guys, is that there is this unfortunate realization at some point that like being in a band isn't just going to band practice and calling up a venue and being like, can we play a show at your venue, and then turning up at the venue and playing the show. There's like a lot of other stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And have you found that now you're doing a lot of soft, like you're recording everything, you're producing everything stuff, a lot of that behind the scenes stuff, it's easier to deal with because you're just doing it for yourself. So you can just say, look, get me this, and this equipment, and I'll get the guys in there to play them.
I find it's actually trickier in ways because we get asked to play a show and then it's just like, do we have a band to play that show? And I'll have to find people and ring people up, and it's quite tricky, but but it's good. It's good. Yeah. The whole thing of booking shows, running social media, trying to do like these campaigns to release a song, it's just like there's no real roadmap for how to do that. And it's just completely different. Like when we're with the Lost Boys, I don't even think Spotify was a thing, man. Like
No,
we didn't put that that EP up on Spotify or any of those platforms because it just wasn't a thing to do that.
didn't exist. And it is interesting, the difference between like when I first started releasing music, there wasn't even such thing as YouTube. Like Bandcamp didn't even exist. So,
Yeah,
like, if you wanted to put music out, you either went to like a studio, or you did a really dodgy recording with a couple of microphones at someone's house with like a tape recorder or something like that,
yeah,
and then you just burnt CDs and gave them out to all your mates. You
exactly,
know,
man. Yeah,
like the way things now is that I can record everything at home, mix it all at home, upload it to Spotify, and someone in Albania can hear my music.
yeah,
It's a really different world. That's happened in what I'd say is a relatively, like that's 20 years. It's
yeah,
gone from, you know, home recording was a thing, but it wasn't very high quality, to now I can put out music that's good enough to send to everybody in the world, and I can send it to everybody in the world using nothing but the phone that I'm holding in my hand.
yeah.
But you know,
It's weird, man. And
like,
like, how do you navigate that change of like, and now it's like, or and we're not going to pay you for that as well. It's just like, oh, we'll
yeah,
give you 0.0004 cents for a stream, and it's just like, all right, that's not enough for an artist, especially like most of the artists uh with smaller followings. They will never make enough to be able to support themselves off streams alone.
yeah.
It,
It is like that's one thing, uh, and I think there's more and more artists these days kind of pushing back against it a bit more and going, hey, like, we're the ones who are writing the music. We're the ones spending our money on getting it recorded. We're the ones, getting someone to mix and master it. All you're doing is hosting a website, and people are paying you thousands upon thousands of dollars to listen to my music, and I'm getting $10. So I think
yeah,
there does seem to be a bit more, but it is interesting. It is kind of the yin and the yang, right? Like, you've got to take the good with the bad. Like,
the
back in the
exposure.
yeah, well, yeah, but it's even more than that. Because back in the day, if you wanted to have people hear your music, you had to sell it to them. Like, they'd have to buy your music, or they might perchance catch it on the radio. But if your music wasn't good enough to get on the radio, they would have to go to a record store and buy it. And so you might get, every time someone listened to your song, initially you'd get $5, for the first time they heard it. And then they could listen to it as many times as they liked. Whereas now, it's like, well, I only have to pay point 0.5 cents. I can listen to a lot more new music, and maybe I'll listen to some random artists from Albania that I've never heard of before.
Mm,
So I think it's that trade-off, like, yeah,
yeah,
if you want that worldwide distribution, you've got to accept that there's going to be some kind of cut in how much you're making from each time someone listens to your music.
yeah. I agree. I agree. And there are other ways around it. Like if I find a band on Spotify that I really love, I'll go buy merch from them, or I'll go find another way to support them.
Yeah,
Expect if I like, if that's my new favorite band, like I'll go buy a T-shirt for sure.
I think that's an important thing too now, that people do need to realize, like, look, the only way that these bands can keep affording to let you have their music on Spotify for free, like, I don't pay for Spotify, but I get to listen to music whoever I want all the time, like, just in the same way that my music goes up on Spotify and people can listen to it for free whenever they want all the time. So I think that's one of the things people do need to kind of take into consideration now. Is it like, yeah, look, back in the day, like you may not have felt like these artists needed your money because they're getting played on the radio and you'd buy their albums. But when was the last time you actually bought the latest album by a band? Like, I think that's a big thing as well, man. It's that you know, releasing music on a digital platform, it allows more people to carry it with them in this day and age as well. When was the last time you saw someone with a Discman?
Yeah, well, I've been getting into buying records.
Yeah,
which has been pretty cool. Like, we've only just got a good record player set up. I never had a good enough record player set up that I could appreciate the record, because it was just the speaker system wasn't very good. But that's giving value to the music again. I feel like it's because you have to work to listen to it, whereas I feel like music has sort of become a bit of like a fast food thing, where it's just like quick and easy, and you just want to listen to something and then just move on to the next thing. And like, say, concept albums, they're not really a thing as much. It's because you just want a single, and you just want to listen to a 3-minute track and move on to the next artist, and you don't listen to a whole project, which was like when I found out about Pink Floyd and like that Wish You Were Here album. It's got like parts 1 through to 4, 3 songs, and then parts 5 through to 12, which is like epic, man. And you can listen to that whole thing start to finish and really get sucked into a whole nother universe or world. And you don't really get that with Spotify. I feel it's more of it's not as much reverence for the music.
I think that's like, I was discussing this with someone the other day. The beauty of listening to records is that you've got to sit and listen to it, and you listen to the whole record, because halfway through you've got to get up and flip it over. And if you don't do that, you're going to wreck your record needle, and then you're going to have to find a new needle, and you're not going to be able to listen to any music. So, like, it is very much more of a thing where you're having to sit and listen to the whole record. And it's why vinyl's so great for concept records. I think one of the best ones I've got is Hawkwind.
Oh, dude.
I've got a Hawkwind a vinyl. I'm pretty sure it's even a live one.
It's not Space Ritual, is it?
I can't remember, to be honest, mate. I'm pretty sure that it is one that Lemmy played on, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure if you're aware of that Lemmy, before Motorhead, was in the band Hawkwind.
I've only just been getting into Hawkwind, and I'm a huge fan, man.
They're great, man. They're really great, and they've got a really interesting history in terms of, Lemmy was in the band for a while, and then eventually, like the last, I think, 2 albums at least, were done using an electronic drummer, because like the guitarist and singer just kind of went off the deep end a little bit and decided that no drummer anywhere could keep perfect time good enough for him. It's the Hawkwind story is pretty wild, but like the wildest one is like, they were like right into their LSD and all the psychedelics, but at one stage Lemmy got pulled up at the border for having amphetamines, and so they let him stay in the band and tour, but after that he got kicked out of the band for enjoying too much of the wrong drugs. It was what he used to say. But yeah, and Hawken are a great band, and that's that's a really great live album which I've got on vinyl, and it's very much one of the things that like you you can listen to a few tracks off it here and there, but you're not getting a full appreciation for any of the tracks on that album unless you listen to it as an album.
Yeah.
And I think that's a one of the things I found about your music as well. And is that the one of the things you're conscious of when you're writing songs, like how they fit together with the other song that you're working on or that you finished working on, or is it kind of
Yeah. Yeah. I got right into that, man. For that first EP was like, how can this whole thing be a journey from start to finish? Deeply inspired by like the Pink Floyd concept albums. It's like, let's start here and see if I can make it flow and tell a story. And each transition, how is that linking to the next song? And uh and then like how can I make my track titles tell that story as well?
yeah,
And so
right.
if you that first EP, if you like read the titles, um it's the hero's journey. It's like every ending is a new beginning is the track one. Then there's Voyage track two, which is like the hero begins, he starts his voyage. Turbulence is the problem of in every story there's a problem.
Yeah,
So and then arrival is like you reach the destination changed, and then it goes back to the start again, which is the ending is the beginning. So it's made to
yeah,
be
yeah,
listened to in a loop.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating way of writing because I've got a project that's more of a doomstone and rock kind of project, and there's a few tracks that I wanted that I've tried to write as a concept album. However, because they're written as individual tracks, doing that whole linking thing is something that I've struggled with. So it's
Mm.
interesting to see that that was something that you were consciously doing while writing the individual tracks rather than something that you tried to do um,
Afterwards.
afterwards, which is maybe one of the mistakes I've made in the process. But it's always good to get a fresh perspective on how other people work as well to kind of you know utilize other techniques to how you go about writing things. So, is there any particular artists, either individual or groups, who you've looked at their like you've listened to interviews with them or read their biographies that like talk about the way they go about writing their music that you've taken kind of
Mm.
guidance from?
Mm. I would say, yeah, Pink Floyd are a massive one, man. Like, you can definitely hear that in the sound, but they were one of the biggest influences, especially with their use of found sounds,
Yeah,
which was like using the samples and like, and then that led me down a rabbit hole of 70s new age electronica, which was like um during the new age movement in the 70s, people were just finding out about synthesizers and creating these epic synth concept albums that would take people on a journey, and they would use these sort of nature sounds in them, and um some of them are trash
yeah,
like, but some of them are just absolute masterpieces,
yeah,
man.
right.
And yeah, that was like deeply inspiring for me. And oh, one thing I struggle with as a writer is option paralysis. Is just having way too many options of
Yeah,
like, especially like that's why I liked using GarageBand. It's just simplified down to like a kid could operate it, and
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like it's so simple. Whereas I've recently switched to Logic because I've got an iPad and they've
yeah,
released Logic on iPad, but it's deep, man, and the depth of you can get lost in just one thing,
Yeah,
and it's just like a kick drum, and it's just and there's so many things that you can do just to that kick drum, and it's just like you get lost and you lose the flow of the writing.
yeah, yeah. So,
And so I like to limit my palette to like, oh yeah, this is what I'm gonna do, and these are the instruments I'm gonna use, and um, let's see once you've created the palette, what you can create with that, if you know what I mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the cool way to do it. And I mean, that's kind of taking it back to like a band concept of, thinking about how you're going to do this live, where you've got like, right, we know we've got two guitars, we know we've got a bass player, and we've got a drummer, and we've got a singer, so we can write those parts.
Yeah.
Whereas I think one of the mistakes some people make, and I've done it myself too many times, is that because I'm just writing for the sake of writing music, and I can utilize whatever I like. I can add a fifth and sixth guitar part, and like you can add an extra bass line, and then you get to the end of this epic thing, and you go, yeah, how do I ever convert this to something that's doable live, like this is
Yeah.
ridiculous, like, and I've done it, and I'm sure,
I've done it
countless
as
others
well.
have done
Yeah.
it. So it is, I think that's probably a good idea to go into a project going, right, like if I'm going to replicate this live, I'm going to need to be able to get this kind of like setup. What can I actually logistically do live with a setup that I can realistically put together? All right, these are the kinds of sounds I can utilize for what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of found sounds as well. So have you done a lot of like uh getting samples of, things out in the wild and utilizing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, yeah, I got right into that for a while, man, of going out and just taking the same setup of the iPhone, the um Focusrite 2i4, and just my SM57, and just like capturing bird sounds. I went up into the rainforest and like, yeah, I love the idea of um taking a listener to a place and sort of like um capturing that experience for the listener as well. And yeah, I did use also just samples from Splice as well. Like
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I found like this really cool like eagle sample that I just thought worked really well with one of the songs, just because it was like a desert song, and it's like, oh, like an eagle flying in would just be perfect for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so um yeah, just yeah, different experimenting with that type of stuff and adding those elements into, yeah, create soundscapes in a way.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've recently started well, not doing adding new instrumentation and elements to different stuff. Like I've got a punk project, and I'm doing a cover of the song Treaty. And I thought it'd be interesting to actually add like a didgeridoo to it, but I can't play a didgeridoo. So I've had our friend Matt Millardi play the
Oh,
didgeridoo on it
cool.
for me. And it changed for me. I added it in where he, and it just changed the whole scape of the soundscape of that part of the song. Like it changed not necessarily the overall feel of the song, but it definitely uh added an element of like a different kind of imagery in the parts of the song where the didgeridoo comes in. So I think it's
Mm,
interesting. It's interesting using, like you said, using those different sounds to create a soundscape to put a listener in a location,
mm.
which is
Eh,
something I feel you've managed to do really well. Um, and like something that I've found you've done in all the different projects, whether it be in a kind of using a soundscape to put them in idea of a physical location or kind of an emotional location through like use of lyrics and you know chordal structures and things like that, um, which is I think it's a tricky thing to do.
Mm.
And is that something that you've kind of got in the back of your mind, if you've always kind of done that, is to have a think about like what is the physical but also emotional message and location that I'm trying to convey here? And was the like emotional side of things something that was more prevalent through, say, Lost Boys, where you were doing a lot more lyric writing?
Yeah. Um. Well, I guess like when I was first writing with the Lost Boys and even like my own solo music, it was just like writing that sort of writing whatever I was feeling in the side and getting that out,
Yeah,
and like that sort of self expression, the cathartic um expression of emotion, and that was all that I thought music was, and that's all that I did with my music, was just like, oh, I feel heartbroken, I'll write this song about heartbreak, or oh, I feel happy, I'll write this happy song. And it was just like that was just what I would do.
yeah,
and like that's great. Like, and like now I sort of try, especially with this space world that I'm trying to create, it's like trying to write about space and create this sort of fantastical world for people to be in. It's a completely different approach to writing.
yeah,
And and it in a way it's not as fulfilling personally, like, because there is this sort of feeling you get when you write a song that's deeply emotionally invested to yourself.
yeah,
It's just like this sort of release of emotion that
yeah,
you sort of get. Whereas this, it's sort of like it's not something that I've felt really, of like being out in space on
yeah,
this distant cosmic land, if you know what I mean. But it's sort of trying to get that and get that across to someone, which is tricky in a way. And so I feel more like a fantasy writer more than like a diary entry when I'm approaching writing lyrics, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think that's, you know, I mean, that's very evident in terms of the kind of lyrics and but like the kind of music you're playing. Obviously, like you said, this is much more of a concept project, and you're trying to create the idea of a space, you know, traveler.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, other bands have been, this is Luke, you know, I'm Luke Thomas, and I'm playing music that this is things I feel about, and it really is. I think one of the things I got from listening to the Lost Boys stuff again this afternoon, there really was like a very evident roller coaster of emotions of different events and things that were happening throughout the, you know, the period of time when that those songs were written and recorded. um
Hmm.
and it's, you know, that's something that's really evident in that music, and you do quite a good job of conveying. um is that something that you kind of were always able to do, or is that something you kind of found easy to do, is talk about the emotions that you were going through and convey them in such a way? Because I know a lot of guys do struggle with being like,
Emotionally vulnerable.
yeah, like, and not even vulnerable, but being willing to acknowledge their emotions, like, you know, acknowledge when they were angry unnecessarily, or acknowledge when they were sad and should have been, you know. I think
Hmm.
yeah, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually just thinking back to the Lost Boys stuff, and I think there was a bit of space elements in that. Now that I'm thinking back to it, like
Yeah,
we had that song "Constellations," which was just instrumental,
yeah,
but it had sort of starry analogies in it, and then making maps. That's sort of very it's like a lot of analogy in the lyrics there. So I'm thinking like maybe I've always done that with my lyric writing, but who knows?
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. You know, like that is. Yeah, it's not something I'd pick, but it might be something that other people did pick up on. Is going back and listening to other projects, a constant running theme of space, and yeah, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to go and visit that. I might have to do a bit more research.
Mm.
So,
So
what does what's the future looking like for you guys as a band? Are you writing more, releasing more, doing more live stuff?
I just going back to your last question about
Yeah,
being writing about your emotions, is that right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I think that just being a musician forces you to be more introspective in life. Like, I think that all musicians are more like consciously aware of themselves in a way, and sort of the inner workings of themselves a bit more
yeah,
because they have to be. Like, uh, like if you're writing a song and you're thinking about it, you're thinking about like your emotions a lot more in a way. Do you agree?
yeah, yeah. I think it's an interesting thing to think of in terms of the kind of music that different songwriters write. For example, a lot of the stuff that I was writing as Biggie Nixz is more of a storytelling joke kind of style of writing. So the emotion that's attached to it is not necessarily a genuine emotion of like what I felt about that situation or that time, because it's a story that I'm telling. Not It's not a story about something that's happened to me. It's a story about something that happened. And I think
Yeah.
that I think that's the way that some musicians not necessarily avoid, but don't kind of feel the need.
Delve into
Yeah,
that.
they don't. Yeah, they don't delve into that, having that like that emotional output, and like they don't feel that need to wear their emotions on their sleeve and
Yeah.
tell. But they do it in other ways. So I think it is interesting when you do
Yeah.
hear, um, and all musicians do it to an extent in all good ones anyway. But it's nice when it's you know that discussion does happen about
Mm.
like it's we feel different things. It's all right to talk about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also the beauty of music is that it's so objective as well. And like I like when artists will write something, they might write it one way and then they'll rewrite it to make it more vague,
Yeah,
and so that it can be perceived in different ways, and then like one person could listen to it and get something out of it, another person can listen to it and get something completely different out of it.
yeah.
And I think like that's also very talented songwriting as well.
Well, I think yeah, I was having this discussion with somebody, might have even been Alex, about how it's refreshing when you get something that's relatable, um, and when things are written in a relatable way. So like
Mm.
it, and that's kind of good lyric writing for me is that something that's not so specific about a certain event or a certain person, but it's more about a situation that enough people can relate to be like, yeah, something just like that happened to me, and I felt just like that, so I can now identify with this singer and this song. And I think that is a tricky thing to achieve as a lyricist.
Yeah, wow.
But it when it's done well, it's really, I mean, it's obvious when it's done well because the crowd
Mm.
all joins in, it generates that united kind of feeling amongst the crowd. So
Yeah, cool, cool, cool.
what's on the horizon for Golden Sunbird? More music coming out soon, or more gigging coming up soon?
Well, we've got Golden Sunbird EP2 coming out called Inner Landscapes, Outer Worlds.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so we've released three singles off that. And then
Yeah.
there's four more tracks that are coming out, which is the rest of the EP. It's pretty long EP, but this EP it explores, the analogy is when we do things that look inside of ourselves, like meditation and sort of exploring the inner workings of our minds and our subconscious. It's very similar to an astronaut exploring deep space. So
Yeah.
it's exploring those two analogies of inner landscapes and outer worlds, and putting those two together with music is, and that's sort of the theme of the EP.
Yeah, right. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Actually, it sounds quite similar to a TV series I've just finished watching called Night Flyers.
Cool.
It's
Haven't heard of that. I'll have to check it out.
it's a good one. You should definitely check it out. It's interesting, but it's examining that kind of the same thing of, there's space travel happening, but at the same time there's a mind reader on the spacecraft, and so that idea of
Oh wow.
exploring the mind and exploring outer
Yeah.
space at the time. And it is you know I like the idea of the concepts of the exploration of the human consciousness being
Yeah.
like exploring unknown universes and going into places that you don't know what you're going to find in there, and you don't know what you're going to find out there, but it's exciting and it should be done.
Yeah, because like you think about the human mind, and it's just like we don't know what consciousness is, and we don't know why we're here or what is really happening. No one really knows. It's just sort of like we're here and we exist, and it's just like there's so much unknown, and like even the things that we do know are based upon things that we don't know,
Yeah,
and it's just like, and then we look up at the stars, and there's just this endless cosmos of expanding space and light, and it's just like we have no idea what's out there either, and
yeah, that's it.
it's just like, yeah, I don't know, I just feel like a space traveler all the time.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's the cool. I definitely dig it as a concept, and I'll be keeping my eyes out for that. Very excited about that.
Yeah, cool, cool.
So, other than your Golden Sunbird stuff, what are you doing with yourself in your free
Yeah.
time, if you have
I
free time?
I'm a farmer.
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, man. I work on a farm and been enjoying that. It's quite cool up here in Tassie.
Yeah,
And then at the moment, because music doesn't pay the bills, so yeah, we play gigs and practice on the weekends,
yeah,
and it works really well. Um, yeah, but at some point, I'd love to just pursue music and make that the full time thing, but we'll see where it goes, man.
yeah, yeah. So, what kind of farming are you doing?
It's all organic vegetables, man.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
so harvesting, uh, cutting, and yeah, broccolis, cauliflowers, everything, man.
Oh, wow, that's great. That's awesome, man. It's such what a beautiful like place to be able to do it too. Like I don't know. The cold would probably get to me. Like I was just talking to someone the other day about playing music in the cold, and just like I've played in a couple of
Your hands just freezing
oh
up trying to
just
fret some chords.
yeah, I just can't think of anything worse than like missing a cymbal and hitting my hand o- on a cymbal stand, you know,
Yeah.
whilst it's blisteringly cold, like it's 3 degrees inside, like ah. So yeah, is that something you've had to adjust to being in Tassie, playing in the cold weather all the time?
Uh, I think we haven't done any outdoor gigs in the cold yet. Um, and usually it's heated in the venue, so we're
Ah,
pretty fine.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, and they tend to not do as many gigs through the winter here, and then when the summer kicks in, it's just like gig central. So
yeah, right. So another couple of months to get the EP all finished and out there and into the world and into people's ear holes, and then you can start smashing out some gigs in the summer months.
yeah, the Tassie takeover.
Oh, mate. So ah, that just sounds ideal to me. Like, you know, right in the winter, gig in the summer, you know, have a have a nice long nap in the autumn.
Into hibernation,
Into
man.
hibernation for a bit. Um, no, that's great, man. And so, this is what you're doing. Just music is just going wholly and solely into your Golden Sunbird at the moment. You're not doing any other solo stuff.
Yeah, just Golden Sunbird. I feel like I have limited time, like
Yeah,
since I do work full time, and then the free time that I do have, I don't want to spread it too much.
yeah,
Yeah, and so I've just got to be very careful of like this is what I can do, and um just not to burn myself out. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's good, man. It's good to stay uh focused on what you're doing, but not have it as the only thing that you're focused on doing and letting
Yep.
it burn you out. So no, it's good to hear, man. So well, I'm looking forward to the next EP. I've been loving hearing what we've heard so far. And I can't wait till you get over here to Brisbane and do a couple of gigs in Brisbane, mate. Well,
Oh, yeah. We'd love to, man. We'd love to eventually get up there and do a tour up the coast.
yeah,
But yeah, we're just working on building up our following um and creating like the best live show that we can, so that it's when we're ready, we'll be there, man. The starship will deploy.
yeah. So one of the things I want to do with this podcast, right, is that everybody that I've had a chat to in 6 to 12 months time, we come back and we have another chat and we have a look at what's going on with the project they're on now. Talk about how things have changed from then to there. So let's say in a little
Dude, sick. That's really cool.
so in 6 months time we're going to come back and see how that first EP went, and let's say in just over 18 months time, let's make a prediction here. Golden Sunbird at Woodford 20. What will that be? That'll be 2025. Let's do Woodford 2025.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see
that's
what
what I,
happens,
that's what I
man.
want to see. 2024 is probably a bit too soon. Probably a bit too soon. You could. I mean, apply. It can't hurt. What do you got to lose? But I reckon realistic 2025 we can expect to see at some point Golden Sunbird at Woodford.
Yeah, and then 2026 we'll have a song playing while um Elon Musk launches his next rocket ship,
Yeah.
man.
Actually, you'll have an entire concept album that has been commissioned by Elon Musk. Just I heard you guys wrote really good songs about going into space. I finally built the rocket that I think is going to keep me alive enough to come back from space in. And I need a soundtrack. What do you reckon?
Yeah.
It'd be great. Well, man, it's been fun to chat. It
has been, dude.
It's good to see, you're keeping up with your music stuff. It's always good to see people going onwards and upwards with this kind of thing. And let's talk again real soon. And how soon are we expecting that new EP?
I reckon it'll be out in the next month and a half, man.
Yeah, so sometime during August, we're looking at that.
Yeah.
Look forward to it. All right, brother. You take care of yourself.
All right, dude. Thanks for the chat.
No worries, man. Be safe.
Be safe.
I called up my friends and we had a chat. Talk about life and just chewing the fat. They'll find it here on Biggie Nixz. Small time big shots.